Hello and welcome back. I'm so glad you're here with me tonight. Wherever you are right now. You 2014 tucked beneath your covers, lying on your side. Maybe the room is just a little dark and the world outside has gone. Quiet you 2014. I want you to know that this is a safe place. This is a slow place. There's nothing you need to do right now except breathe. And maybe close your eyes. And let this story find you gently. Take one slow breath in, and let it go. Tonight, I want to tell you something true. Something that happened to me a long time ago. In a season of my life when I wasn't expecting anything at all. I wasn't looking for magic. I wasn't even looking for kindness, really. I was just getting through the days. The way most of us do. You 2014 one foot in front of the other. Coffee in hand, making do. That something happened on an ordinary bus on an ordinary afternoon. And it changed me in ways I'm still understanding. Even now. So settle in. Let your shoulders drop. There's no hurry here. My name is Eleanor. Though most people in my life, you 2014, most people who knew me well. Anyway, you 2014 called me Ellie. I've always liked that better. Eleanor sounds like someone who knows what she's doing. Ellie sounds like someone still figuring it out. Which, even in my early 40s, felt more honest. I lived, at the time of this story, in a mid-sized city in Ohio. Not a flashy city, not the kind of place people visit on purpose, but it had a certain quietness to it that I had always found comforting. You 2014 wide, tree-lined streets, old brick buildings downtown, a river that ran through the south end of town and caught the light in the late afternoon in a way that made you stop and look even when you were in a hurry. I had lived there for most of my adult life. I had gone to college there. I had built something like a life there, piece by piece, in the way you do. At the time this story takes place, it was October. That specific kind of Ohio October, that comes in like a long exhale. You 2014, the air cool and clean. The sky a deep, soft grey most mornings. The trees holding on to their last red and amber leaves before the wind finally persuaded them to let go. It's my favorite month still. It smells like wood smoke and cold dirt and something harder to name. You 2014 maybe. Just the feeling of the year winding down. Of the world preparing to rest. I was 42 years old. I had been divorced for about 3 years by then. Not bitterly. Not dramatically. My marriage had simply run its quiet course, like a river that gradually loses its current and eventually stills. My ex-husband David was a decent man. You 2014. We were just two people who had grown into different shapes. And when we finally admitted that out loud, there was more relief than grief. We didn't have children. That was something I had grieved in a different chapter. And by the time the divorce came, I had made a kind of peace with it. Not a triumphant peace. Just a quiet one. I was working then as a copy editor for a small regional magazine. You 2014. The kind of magazine that publishes local interest stories, features about farmers markets and historic neighborhoods, profiles of people who had lived in the same house for 60 years. I loved my work. It suited me. I had always been the kind of person who noticed when a comma was missing, who took satisfaction in making sentences flow cleanly, who found a particular pleasure in the small, careful tending of words. My apartment was 2 miles from the magazine's office, in a building with a creaky elevator and a landlord, who fixed things slowly but always eventually fixed them. I did not own a car. This is important to the story. I had owned a car once briefly in my 30s. But parking in my neighborhood was expensive and unreliable, and I had realized over time that I actually preferred to walk and take the bus. There was something I liked about the rhythm of it. The waiting, the watching, the way a bus ride gave you a little pause between one part of the day and the next. I would bring a book sometimes, or just look out the window. I was comfortable being still. The bus I took most often was the number 14, which ran from the Arts District downtown, U 2014 close to my office, up 2014, all the way out to the eastern neighborhoods where the streets got wider and the houses had yards. My stop was about halfway along that route, near a small park, with 2 benches and an old oak tree that I watched change with every season. On the afternoon this story really begins, I was tired. Not the dramatic, collapsed kind of tired. Just the low-level, bone-deep tiredness of someone who had been carrying things quietly for a long time. I had been to the dentist that day, U2014, nothing serious. Just a cleaning and a small filling, U2014, and my jaw ached a little. And I hadn't eaten lunch because of the appointment. And the October sky had gone from grey to a darker grey, and I could smell rain coming. I stood at the bus stop with my coat pulled close and my bag on my shoulder, and I thought, very calmly, that I just wanted to get home. The number 14 arrived about 4 minutes late, which was normal. I stepped on, tapped my card, and moved to the middle of the bus because the front was already full. It was that late afternoon rush, U2014, not frantic, not overcrowded, just comfortably busy. People with grocery bags and backpacks and tired eyes, looking at their phones or out the window, or at nothing in particular. I found a seat by the window, about 2/3 of the way back. The seat next to me was empty. I set my bag on my lap and leaned, my head slightly toward the glass, and watched the city move past. The bus made 3 stops. At the 3rd stop, U2014 outside, the old library building with the stone lions flanking the steps. U2014, several people got on, and one of them sat down beside me. I didn't look up right away. I was watching the library steps, thinking vaguely about a book I had read there as a child on a class trip. But I was aware of the person beside me in that ambient, peripheral way you're always aware of the person who has just sat down next to you on public transit. They were quiet. They didn't bump me or jostle the seat. They settled in slowly, and there was a particular care to it. After a moment, I glanced over. He was older than me, U2014, I guessed mid to late 50s, though I would later learn he was 58. He was tall even sitting down, with the kind of frame that had once been broader and had slimmed with age. He had silver hair, cut close and neat, and a short grey beard. His coat was dark navy, slightly damp at the shoulders from the first drops of rain that had begun to fall. He had a canvas bag on his lap, U2014, the reusable kind, with something bulky inside, U2014, and his hands rested on top of it. His hands were the kind you noticed, large, capable-looking, with the slight roughness of someone who had done work with them. He was looking straight ahead. I looked back out the window. The bus moved. The rain began in earnest now, a soft, steady sound against the glass. The heater was on, and the interior of the bus was warm, and it smelled like damp coats and old upholstery. Not unpleasant. U2014, just human. Just lived in. Someone near the front was listening to music through small earbuds. A faint tinny sound. A child 2 rows behind us said something to its mother in a low, sleepy voice, and the mother murmured back. I don't know exactly when I became aware that the man next to me was in some kind of distress. It was gradual, the way awareness often is. U2014, not a sudden alarm, but a slow accumulation of small signals. His breathing was very controlled. Too controlled, actually, the way someone breathes when they are trying not to let something show. His hands on the canvas bag tightened slightly, and then released. Tightened and released. He was very still otherwise. Very carefully still. I didn't say anything. It wasn't my place. You learn on public transit not to intrude. But I found myself glancing at him again. U2014. Just for a second, U2014, and in that second, I saw that his jaw was set, and his eyes were fixed on some middle distance, and there was something behind them that I recognized, the way you recognize a familiar landscape even in fog. I had looked like that, in those years after my divorce, sitting in my car in parking lots before appointments I didn't want to keep. Composed on the outside, holding something on the inside that didn't quite fit. I looked back out the window. The bus slowed for a stop. 2 people got off. The doors sighed shut and the bus pulled forward and the rain came harder against the glass, ribboning down in thin silver lines. And then, quietly, the man beside me said, "I'm sorry." I turned. He was looking at me now, and there was something open and slightly embarrassed in his face. "I think I'm having a harder afternoon than I realized," he said. "I apologize if I'm U2014, I don't know. Taking up too much space." I looked at him for a moment. His eyes were brown. I noticed. A warm, steady brown. "You're not taking up any space," I said. He made a small sound, U2014, not quite a laugh, but close to one. "That's kind of you. Are you all right?" I asked. It was a simple question, the kind you ask without thinking. But he seemed to consider it genuinely, looking away for a moment toward the rain-streaked window, before he said, "I think I will be." I nodded. "That's usually enough," I said. He looked at me again, and this time there was something different in his expression. U2014, a kind of surprise, maybe, or recognition. "Yeah," he said softly. "I think you're right." We rode in silence for another minute or two. Comfortable silence, which is a different thing entirely from awkward silence. The rain, the heater, the low sounds of the bus, U2014, it was all very gentle. Then he said, "I was at the hospital today. Not for myself. My sister." He paused. "She's going to be fine, they think. Probably fine." But it was U2014, it was a longer day than I expected. "I'm glad she's going to be okay," I said. And I meant it. "Thank you." He exhaled slowly. "I came from the hospital on the bus because I couldn't U2014. I didn't want to be alone in a car right now." Is that strange? "No," I said. "Not at all." He turned his head and looked at me more directly then, and smiled. U2014, a small, careful smile, the kind that isn't performing happiness, just acknowledging something. "My name is Thomas," he said. "Ellie," I said. We shook hands, which felt both slightly formal and entirely right for the moment. I had not intended to talk much. I had been tired, and I had planned to ride quietly and go home and heat up soup and sit on my couch with a book, and my old tabby cat, Mabel, who was 15 and arthritic and the best company I had ever kept. That had been my whole plan for the evening. It was a good plan. But Thomas and I talked for the rest of the bus ride. Not about heavy things. Not at first. We talked the way strangers sometimes do, when circumstance has already broken a little of the formality. U2014 loosely, lightly, with a kind of ease that surprised me. He asked what I did for work, and when I told him I was a copy editor, he was genuinely interested. He asked what kinds of things I edited, and I told him about the magazine, about the local stories, and he said he loved that kind of work. UTWO014, the documenting of small lives, the record of ordinary things. He was a furniture maker, he told me. Custom pieces, mostly U2014 tables, chairs, bookshelves, the occasional bed frame. He had a workshop on the edge of the city, near the river. He had been doing it for 20 years, since leaving a career in architecture that had been successful, but had not made him happy. I asked him what the difference was between architecture and furniture, and he thought about it carefully before answering. "With a building," he said, "you're making something for everyone and no one. With a table, U2014 someone eats dinner at that table every night. Their kids do homework there. They tell each other important things at that table. It feels more real to me, more connected." I thought about that for a moment. "I feel that way about sentences," I said, and he laughed. U2014, a real laugh, quiet and warm, U2014, and said, "Yes, exactly like that." My stop was coming up. I could see the park through the rain-blurred window, the old oak shedding the last of its copper leaves. I stood and reached for the cord to signal the stop, and then U2014, and I I still don't entirely know what moved me to do this. U2014, I hesitated, and I said, I hope your sister feels better soon. Thank you, he said. I hope you have a nice evening, Ellie. There was something in the way he said my name. Just a single syllable. Nothing elaborate. But it landed carefully, like something handled with attention. I got off the bus. I walked home through the rain, which had softened to a mist by then, and the leaves on the sidewalk were wet and bright under the streetlights. And I thought about Thomas the furniture maker and his sister, and his careful hands, and the way he'd said, I think I will be. And I felt U2014. I'm not sure how to describe this exactly. Up-wo-oh-1-4. I felt the way you feel when you have a cup of something warm in your hands and you're not thinking about anything in particular. Just present. Just here. I heated up my soup. Mabel came and arranged herself next to me on the couch. I read until 10 o'clock and went to sleep and did not think I would ever see him again. But here is what happens with cities, U2014, and I think this is one of the quiet mercies of living in a place long enough. Up-2014. You begin to overlap with people in ways that don't feel random, even if they are. Rhythms match up. Roots converge. The city, without announcing itself, begins to show you the same faces. 2 weeks later, I was at the farmer's market that ran on Saturday mornings in the square near my office. It was November by then, just barely U2014, one of those first sharp November mornings when you can see your breath, and the vendors are all wearing heavy gloves and the whole market has the particular beauty of things that are almost done for the season. I had bought a bunch of late season carrots and a loaf of bread with seeds in it, and I was standing at the coffee cart warming my hands on a paper cup when I heard someone say my name. I turned. Thomas. He was wearing a heavy wool coat, and he had a paper bag tucked under one arm, and he looked surprised and then quietly pleased in that order. Ellie, he said again, and I thought U2014, yes. There it was. That same careful landing. Thomas, I said, do you come here often? He asked, and then made a face, unaware how that sounded. I laughed. Every Saturday that the market is open, I said. Usually, he said, I buy vegetables and tell myself I'm going to cook properly, and then mostly just roast everything together and call it a meal. That is cooking properly, I said. We stood there for a moment, both holding our coffee cups in the cold morning air, and then he said, would you want to walk a little? If you're not in a hurry. I wasn't in a hurry. I rarely was on Saturday mornings. And so we walked. We walked the length of the market, and then a little beyond it, toward the river, which was high from the November rains, and moved with a kind of heavy confidence through its banks. We talked the way we had on the bus, U2014, easily, without pressure, following the thread of conversation wherever it went naturally. He told me about a bookshelf he was building for a woman who had specified, very precisely, that the third shelf from the bottom had to be exactly 22 inches deep because that was where she planned to keep her record player. He told me about his sister, U2014, her name was Patricia, and she was home from the hospital and recovering steadily from what had turned out to be a cardiac event that was caught in time. Thank God, and he said those last 2 words very quietly. I told him about Mabel, about the magazine, about a piece I had been editing that week about a 90-year-old man in our county who had planted an apple orchard by hand 60 years ago and still harvested it every fall with his grandchildren. Thomas listened the way some people do, U2014, fully, without waiting for his turn to talk. It's rare, that kind of listening. I noticed it. When we reached the part of the riverfront path that curved back toward the market, we stopped by a low stone wall and looked at the water for a while. There was a great blue heron standing, absolutely still in the shallows near the opposite bank, like something painted into the scene. Can I give you my number? Thomas said. And if you'd ever want to have coffee sometime, or just U2014, I don't know. It was nice to talk to someone. I looked at him. His expression was open and slightly uncertain in the way that takes courage, the kind of courage that doesn't announce itself. He wasn't performing confidence. He was just asking. Yes, I said. I'd like that. We had coffee the following Thursday. And then dinner 2 weeks after that, at a small Italian place he knew that had red check tablecloths and a single candle on each table and a bread basket that arrived without being asked for, which I have always considered the sign of a truly good restaurant. We talked for 3 hours. The server refilled our water glasses 4 times without us noticing. I want to be careful here about how I tell this part of the story, because I don't want to make it sound like a thing with momentum and destination, like a train on a track. It wasn't like that. It was slower. It was 2 people learning each other gradually, the way you learn a place by walking it many times in different seasons. There were dinners and walks and afternoons at the market, and one Saturday in December when a small snowfall caught us on the riverfront path, and we stood watching the snow come down on the water, and neither of us said anything because nothing needed to be said. He had been divorced too. Much longer ago, U2014 12 years. He had a daughter, Nora, who was 26 and lived in Portland and worked as a marine biologist and called him every Sunday. He lit up when he talked about Nora, in a particular and quiet way, the way a lamp behind frosted glass glows. U2014, not bright and direct, but warm and pervasive. He had lived alone, in a house near his workshop, for a long time. He had built most of the furniture in it himself, of course, and he said this without vanity, U2014, just as fact. The house had a garden in the back that he let go mostly wild. He liked birds. He kept a feeder. He told me the names of all the birds. That came to it, U2014. White-throated sparrows, dark-eyed juncos, a pair of cardinals he had named. Embarrassingly, he said, Harold and Maud. I told him that wasn't embarrassing at all. What I remember most about those early months is the quality of ease. There was no anxiety in it, no performance. With Thomas, I felt the specific relief of not needing to be anything I wasn't. I didn't have to be younger or more interesting or more certain of things. I could be exactly 42 years old, and tired sometimes and quietly hopeful, and that was. U2014, it was enough. I was enough. He made me feel that without ever saying it, which is the only way it counts. I think about what it means to be met exactly where you are, not where you were, or where you might be. Right here, in this present version of yourself, with your aching jaw and your old cat and your preference for the bus. I had not known how much I needed that till I had it. The night I told him I loved him. It was February. We were at his house, the first time I had been there. He had made dinner, U2014. Pasta with a simple tomato sauce and salad from a bag, which he was slightly self-conscious about. The kitchen smelled like garlic and warm bread. There was a candle on the table that was slightly too short for its holder and tilted at a mild angle. The radio was on low in the other room. Something instrumental and unhurried. After dinner, we sat on the couch with tea. And Mabel was not there. U2014, she was home. In my apartment. U2014, and I was very aware of the space around us. The warm lamplight. The way the windows had gone dark with the February night outside. He was telling me about a chair he was making for a man whose wife had recently died. UTWO014. The man had brought in a photograph of his wife in her favorite chair and asked Thomas to replicate it as exactly as he could, so that he could sit in the shape of something she had loved. Thomas told me this story slowly, carefully, and I watched his face as he told it, and I felt something open and settle in my chest at the same time, the way a window can let in air and let out something stale. I didn't plan what I said next. It arrived simply, the way true things often do. I love you, I said. He went quiet. Not frozen U2014, just still in that way of his. And then he looked at me with those warm brown eyes and said, I've been waiting to say that to you for a while. I didn't want to get it wrong. Did you get it right? I asked. I love you, Ellie, he said. Yes, I think so. I want to tell you something about middle-aged love, if I may. Because I think it gets overlooked in the stories we tell each other, and I think that's a shame. When you fall in love young, the love has a brightness to it that can sometimes be blinding. Up to 014, it's loud and urgent and it crowds out everything else. And that is wonderful, it is. But it doesn't always leave room for the quiet, for the slow noticing, for the kind of love that builds itself unhurriedly, the way a table gets built, joint by joint with care, with consideration for how the grain runs and where the weight will fall. When I fell in love with Thomas, I was a person who had already been shaped by a great deal of living. I had loved and lost and grieved and healed and disappointed myself and surprised myself and learned the particular freedom of no.